What's up, guys? So I was asked to do the best phones with a headphone jack. So I did the best phones with SD card support. So we're gonna go ahead and knock this one out. And I think the number one phone that you should probably look at, if you're looking for a phone with headphone jack, is definitely the LG V60. I think it's a steal. If you want an older flagship, I do have some phones on here that are some newer phones and some mid-rangers that you guys might like. But I think this is the best option in it's because this phone not only has a headphone jack, but it actually has a quad DAC. So you can get some really good audio out of the LG V60 for sure. Now, this phone does have a pretty nice design. It's aluminum frame, a glass back. It's really built like a tank. It's IP68 dust and water resistant. Not only that, but it does have dual screen case support, and you also have pen support along with the micro SD card support. So this phone is really stacked when it comes to features. You have a 6.8-inch POLED display. It's HDR10 plus, 1080p, 395 for the PPI. Pretty decent display. Can't really say anything bad about it. It does not have any type of high refresh rate, but like I said, it has a really smooth display for a 60 hertz panel. This phone, it actually did get the Android 13 update, and it's super smooth. Snapdragon 865 is on board, and I have a gaming test for this phone, and it does a fantastic job when it comes to gaming on here. So definitely you can game on here, no issues. PUBG, Call of Duty, whatever. 128 gigs of internal storage and 8 gigs of RAM. And then you also have, like I said, stereo speakers on here, which sound really good. Headphone jack, quad DAC, SD card support, basically everything you would want in terms of features. The fingerprint scanner is under the display. It's, fairly decently fast. I think the cameras on the V60 are still pretty decent as well too. It's 64 megapixel standard, 13 megapixel ultra wide, 0.3 depth sensor, shoots in 8K 30 with a 10 megapixel selfie, also shoots in 4K 30. You get really good color on here, really good natural true to life colors on here, and it takes overall great shots, as you can see here. Very good detail, good dynamic range. Yeah, so overall I have no real issues with the cameras on the V60, especially for the price. You can buy this phone easily 200 and under. You also have on here very good battery life, 5,000 milliamp hour battery, and then you also have wireless charging on board. This phone easily lasts a full day, no problem. So definitely it would be my number one pick. All right, so if you don't want an old flagship, I think the Poco F5 is a pretty decent phone to buy. You also can go spend a little bit more money and get the F5 Pro as well too. And this is a pretty decent phone. It's got a plasticky design, so I think that was like the one thing that was just felt kind of cheap about this phone. Plastic bag, plastic frame. It's IP53 dust and splash proof. The overall design looks fine. Like I said, it's just kind of like a really light feeling phone. And this phone has a pretty decent display. It's a 6.67 inch display, 1080p, Dolby Vision, HDR10 plus, 120 hertz, 1000 nits peak brightness. That's a pretty decent display, 395 for the PPI. Fairly sharp, gets fairly bright, so no issues at all with the panel on this phone. I think the highlight with this phone is definitely the chip. It's the Snapdragon 7 Plus Gen 2 processor, which is very impressive chip. You can pretty much put it on par with basically like the S21 Ultra or something like that. It does a pretty good job with gaming. I was able to play PUBG at 90 frames, and it's just overall super fast in performance. So I think the chip on here is awesome. It basically feels like a flagship phone. It's got Android 13, MIUI 14 on here as well too. No SD card support, 256 gigs of internal storage, and the base model is 8 gig of RAM, but you should be able to get a 12 gig of RAM version pretty easily. And like I said, stereo speakers on here with a headphone jack. This does have a headphone jack, and the speakers do sound pretty good. I think also what was pretty impressive, and that's one of the comments I got on the video, is I think the camera, just for taking stills, is actually pretty decent on here. It's a 64 megapixel standard, 8 megapixel ultra wide, 2 megapixel macro. The only thing is there's no telephoto lens or anything like that. And the video quality, you can only shoot in 4K 30, so no 4K 60. And you have a 16 megapixel selfie cam that shoots in 1080 60. So yeah, so the overall quality of the stills, it takes pretty good photos, in my opinion. As you can see, pretty good detailed. And overall, I had no major issues with image quality. The fingerprint scanner is side mounted, it's physical, and I thought it was, that's my favorite implementation. And also battery life is pretty good on here as well too. Big battery at 5,000 milliamps. And I think the cool thing is it comes with the charger in the box and it's 67 watts. So this thing charges super fast as well too. So overall, it's a pretty good phone if you're looking for a mid-ranger. Now next is the Asus Zenfone 9, and they also have the Zenfone 10 that I'm gonna try to get for the channel. It's still for pre-order right now, but the Zenfone 9 has come down in price, especially in the used marketplace. You can find it for like 500 bucks, and it's a very good flagship phone here. It's got the plastic back aluminum frame, and it just feels really good. It's a really nice looking phone, and also this is a compact phone as well too. It's IP68 dust and water resistant as well, and it's very easy to one hand. So for anybody who's looking for something small to one hand, this is it. This has the Super AMOLED display, 120 Hz HDR10 plus, 1100 nits peak brightness at 5.9 inches. So like I said, very easy to one hand. 1080p 445 for the PPI. Overall, a really nice high quality display on here. It is running Android 13 with the Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 processor. So obviously it's a flagship chip, so it's going to be very fast. You can play pretty much anything you throw at it. No overheating, no nothing. It's just a really fast phone. You also have 128 gigs of internal storage, 6 gigs of RAM on the base model, and this phone does have a headphone jack, of course. You also have really good stereo speakers considering the size of this phone. Really good bass and just a very full sound, so that's one thing I was pretty impressed with. Fingerprint scanner is physical on the side, absolutely love that. And then this phone has really good cameras, a 50 megapixel standard, 12 megapixel ultra wide, and I think the only thing this phone is missing is a dedicated telephoto lens, but other than that, it's a really good camera. It shoots in 8K24, 12 megapixel standard, shoots in 4K 30. I absolutely love the cameras on here. Really good dynamic range, just really good colors on here. Just a beast when it comes to stills. This phone also has, believe it or not, very good battery life. It's a 4300 milliamp hour battery at 30-watt wire charging, and then you have reverse wire charging on here. The battery life is phenomenal for the size of this phone. It's really good. It definitely lasts a full day, and you just have to give it extra points for being super small and having really good battery life. All right, so the next phone is the Galaxy S10 Plus. So you can find these really cheap, and if you're somebody that wants a Samsung phone, then I think you'll really like this phone. And it has a aluminum frame, glass back on here, and this phone also has headphone jack and SD card support. It's the last Samsung flagship to have that combo. Like I said, IP68 dust and water resistant. I still like the design on here. It's got the dynamic AMOLED HDR10 Plus display, 6.4 inches, 1440p, 522 for the PPI. Still a beautiful panel, really high resolution display on here, and it still looks phenomenal till this day. The last update for this phone was Android 12 One UI 4.1, and it has the Snapdragon 855 chip on here. It still plays games really well. Surprisingly, I did a full updated video on it if you guys want to check that out. It also has micro SD card support, 128 gigs of internal storage, and 6 gigs of RAM. Like I said, stereo speakers on here with the headphone jack. Stereo speakers sound pretty good. It's got a triple camera setup. Now, the camera, it is a little bit dated when it comes to low light photography, but I think outdoor photography, it still does a pretty good job. I would put it in the category of like a newer mid-ranger. It's got a 12 megapixel standard, 12 megapixel telephoto, 2x optical zoom, and then a 16 megapixel ultra wide. Shoots in 4K 60, 10 megapixel selfie cam. It has an 8 megapixel depth sensor as well too, and then you can shoot in 4K 60 as well. Like I said, the cameras I think have aged really well, except for like obviously low light photography. This phone has the under the display fingerprint sensor. It still has a lot of the essential Samsung features like you can still use Samsung desktop support. You can still use the Good Lock application. So it still has a lot of the essential stuff. Battery life is somewhat decent on here. You're going to be getting a refurbished one most likely. So it's 4100 milliamp hour batteries. Mine can get around like 6 hours of screen on time, which is pretty decent. But typically these will go from like 5 to 6 hours. 15-watt wire charging is kind of slow. 15-watt wireless charging and reverse wireless charging is on board, and I still like this phone as a old flagship. I think it's still really nice. And lastly, we do have the Xperia 1 Mark V, and we've never actually brought a Sony phone on the channel, so let me know if you guys would like to see one. But this is a flagship phone. It is very costly, around like $1,200 I believe, And it's a flagship phone, aluminum frame, IP65 and 68, dust and water resistant. It's got the really tall aspect ratio display, 6.5 inches, and then I believe it's a 4K panel as well too. It's 643 for the PPI, so a super high res panel. It's an OLED, 120 hertz, HDR BT 2020 on here, and then you also have Android 13, Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 processor. I've heard of these Sony phones just from some of my subscribers like overheated and stuff like that, but just know it's a very fast chip and it'll basically be able to do anything. But like I said, I have to get my hands on it. It also has micro SD card support, 256 gigs of internal storage, 12 gigs of RAM, stereo speakers. It does have the headphone jack as well, and then you also have on here fingerprint scanner, physical side mounted on here, and then you also have a 48 megapixel standard, 12 megapixel telephoto, and a 12 megapixel ultra wide. This phone is typically like one of its highlights is I believe the camera software and stuff like that, like has really advanced camera software that you can use like professionally with other like cameras and setups and stuff like that. I believe so. It also has the 12 megapixel standard, shoots in 4K 30. Stereo speakers on here, big battery at 5,000 milliamps, and then a 30-watt wired charger, and then wireless and reverse wireless charging. Definitely a phone to look at and consider if you do want something that is much newer. And that's pretty much it, guys. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.